Welcome back to the Become a Provider podcast. And my guest today is a new friend, Dr. Stefanie Ruper. I actually connected with her at a local co working spot. And what I love is how God puts certain people in our life just at the right time. And as soon as I struck up my initial conversations with her, I felt compelled to say, would you please share your faith journey and your career journey on the podcast? It would be fantastic. And I think you'll be blessed by this as I was. So let me share with you Stefanie's bio. Stefanie is a full time writer and ghostwriter living in Durham, North Carolina. She spends her professional life helping people with helpful ideas articulate them in accessible and engaging ways. She recently transitioned to this career after receiving a PhD in religion and theology from the University of Oxford in the UK. Once dead set on being a prestigious philosopher, Stefanie realized her true joy and calling were not to advocate for her own ideas, but to use her skills to help elevate a plurality of voices. You can visit her work on her website, stefanieruper.com. That's Stefanie spelled Stefani, Ruper, Ruper.com. She's also on X/Twitter at Stefanie Ruper. And just wanted to share with you my quick takeaways from the conversation that will prime you for what you're about to hear and see. So, one of my takeaways was how she is trying to live a slower life and how that helps create more community opportunities. Secondly, she has such an invitational posture to faith in God, coming from the background that she has in science and atheism. It's really inspiring to see how she's now open to faith. She also talks about how incredible radical hospitality has influenced her. And I love the phrase that she said, she's like a moth drawn to the fire and the light of Christian community. And it just made me think to myself, how can I be that radical hospitality person as well for people like Dr. Stefanie? And lastly, she helps creators make ideas sing. And she talks about, well, how do you know how to do that? And it's, you need to know who you're singing to and to remember that truth and goodness always resonate. So with that introduction, I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with my new friend, Dr. Stefanie Ruper. All right, we're live. Dr. Stefanie, cheers. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, cheers. I have my caffeinated and my non-caffeinated beverages, so we'll see where I'm led. We'll see where I'm led in this conversation and what I need.
There you go. I love it. Well, you'd mentioned that you're working on a health and wellness book, and so I wonder, has that influenced maybe reducing some of sugary drinks, or have you been in a positive habit before doing this work on your latest book?
No, so I have for a very long time had part of my professional life be in health and fitness. So I actually usually I have not had a sugary drink. I cannot remember the last time. No, it was a week and a half ago because I did a lemonade stand with some neighboring kids, but I never in my personal consumption do, do the sugary drinks. But anyway.
That's great. Well, in our back and forth a little bit in preparation for this chat, you mentioned how you no longer discount some coincidences, and how we connected was a nice random coincidence, quote unquote, where I'm part of a men's prayer group on Fridays at a local co-working place, and here you are working away at your laptop strategically right next to the coffee, and we struck up a conversation. I learned a little bit about what she did, and then all of a sudden I said, I just felt called to say, I need to have Steph on the podcast, and so here we are. So thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege. It's been a hot minute since I have spoken about these kinds of topics, like publicly. I have done a lot of quote unquote influencing in various realms throughout my life, and for a few years, I felt very compelled. I'm not going to say called because I this was I think very very driven by ego and intellect and a lot of things, but I felt very called, or a lot of pressure, to try to always be sharing my ideas and my journey. And I think there was something kind of noble in that, because I wanted to be as open and honest as I could. If my journey could help unlock other people's journeys, that's, really, really great. But I decided several months back to take take a more relaxed approach, to kind of step out of the public eye, to stop trying to like promote a specific set of ideas, and be a little bit more invitational to whatever may come, to sort of be open to things that come my way that may or may not be coincidental, and see where it leads. I was just so much in the driver's seat, and sort of pushing to try to make certain things happen in my life. And now I'm leaning into trust. I'm leaning into trust, and yeah, it's been going wonderfully. So anyway, when you and I had that nice serendipitous moment meeting in the kitchen, I thought, yeah, like this, I'm following an invitation instead of trying to like push a certain set of ideas, which yeah, I don't know.
Well, that in itself, that would be an interesting conversation to have, because I think we would all love to live a life that is what I call, and what Bob Goff, the author, says, living a whimsical life. And it sounds like that's what you're doing now. It's being more open to it. And you give a lot for a podcaster like myself to dance around in different arenas. So we're going to talk a little bit about philosophy and brands, because I'm a business guy. I think that would be super interesting. And before we get into that, this may not go anywhere, but this stood out to me about your resume. Uh, Tell us about the NASA space grant that you got. What is that about?
um well, yeah, so I was funded on a NASA space grant, for some research that I was doing as an undergraduate. It's not People get those grants, so it wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. But something where this could lead for us to discuss, if you want, is that my initial studious background, like in academia, was in the sciences. My first degree was in earth science. I was studying actually like the biochemical origins of life and life on other planets. I was trying to say something
Hmm.
deep about the world using science, because I had always been hungry for depth, but I had grown up in a context where I thought religion was for stupid and weak people. So I leaned into science as a way to try to make sense of the world and make meaning for myself. And I was, again, like participating in this whole identity that is actually, I think, quite common in our culture today, and growing, of being this like strong atheist who resists the temptations of faith, and also using science as this means of exploring the world, and sort of neglecting and deriding the others. As I was finishing this work, while I was working under this NASA space grant, I began waking up to the fact that I had dismissed the most cherished beliefs of 99% of people who had ever existed as silly and weak, without ever asking them what they thought. So instead of going on to do graduate work in the sciences, I went to seminary as an
Yeah.
atheist, which was awesome. It
Wow.
was awesome. Yeah.
Well, I love that, because it shows how you're willing to, I don't know, be open to other perspectives. So here you are. It sounds like you go into that class and that grant with an expectation of, or maybe an assumption that people that believe in anything but the sciences are kind of weak and stupid, right? Like if you're just like relying on religion and not looking at any science. And then how in the world do you go from that perspective to then pursuing academic career in theology and religion?
Mm. Right. So as I was wrapping all this up, I was realizing that, well, A, I was just bad at science. I wasn't cut out for it. B, you have to be a tinkerer. I prefer to abstractly theorize and ignore details. So I I found a master's program in religion and science, which is its kind of like own field. It's a subfield, a mixture of a bunch of different fields, a meeting place of similar minds. Um, and I did this degree at Boston University, which is a seminary. Like I had prided myself on open mindedness my entire life, and I was like, I love science because I'm open minded. um, but I realized that I had been quite closed-minded, because for me, genuine open-mindedness is open-heartedness and a desire to like get out of my own way, to recognize my own position. And I just literally, I hadn't listened to what these people actually had to say. So when I went to Boston University, there was a house for people who like were real serious about theology and were aspiring pastors. It was called Theology House. And I said to the administrators, I was like, hey, can I live there? And they're like, you're an atheist? And I was like, yep. And they were like, yeah, okay. so, so and it was just wonderful, because I really believe that, like, that's that's such a core principle, and something that we all share is our ability to learn from one another if we listen. And I think we're called to exercise that ability. That's the only way that we grow. Any perspective that any of us ever has is more characterized, I think, by its limits than by its virtues. And so I'm always really, really eager to try to find what I'm missing. So anyway, so I went to seminary, and I studied religion and science, and then I went on and I got a PhD in it. And what I studied for my doctoral work was how people use science to make meaning in today's world, which is basically, it was autobiographical. It's what I had done my whole life. So yeah, so that's what I did. And I'm stepping kind of beyond that now. But professionally, it's still deeply, it's all I ever think about.
Well, if you don't mind, how or what, if anything, did the people in the house teach you?
Yeah. You know, so much. Some of my strongest memories. It was like the best year of my life to date. Things have continued to go great, but it was so wonderful and eye-opening. Like one time I came home and it was December, and I went into one of the kitchens, and one of the people in the house was making dinner, and somebody sitting at the table was one of the home insecure folks I knew used to sat on the street near our home a lot, right? And so this friend of mine, this person in the house, had invited somebody in off the street, cooked them a meal, and was just like chatting with them, and that was the first experience I had of radical hospitality. I mean, yeah, it's radical. It shouldn't. I wish that it weren't radical, but it is. And I was just really struck by that person, like walking this walk. And in that moment, and continually throughout that time, part of the reason that I have been, as I often say, like a moth to the bonfire of Christian community, is that, I mean, yeah, there are some ways in which certain Christian communities are deeply inhospitable. Like that's just, not
Sure.
welcoming, not, you can do things beautifully or poorly, like great. But there is such a beautiful way that the Christian life empowers people to be beautifully welcoming and hospitable. That's something that still just, it's so beautiful to me. And again, it's not always that way, but it can be that way. And yeah, so that really rocked my world. And I loved how we were able to have fellowship across our differences and hold space for one another. And I was able to hold space for certain people in the house as they sort of woke up to things that they hadn't been aware of, like the Bible written by humans, written by different humans, all these different kinds of things. Questions about different kinds of things happening in culture. I was able to hold space for them. But yeah, the fellowship was just really beautiful and striking. That was my big takeaway that year. And I didn't in seminary like become a theist. I didn't become a believer throughout any of my studies, but I became progressively more more open to faith as I deconstructed myself and sort of understood all of the different ways that these things can be lived. And that's a whole it's a whole bunch of different ideas that we could dig into or not. But that house, anyway, very beautiful.
Wow. You
Yeah.
mentioned a really nice phrase, and you described yourself as a moth being attracted to the bonfire of Christianity. Is there another moment or two that you could share about that that resonates with you?
Um, well, I mean, I in that house specifically, like I have memories of, cooking together and playing music together. And, I had only ever lived, well, that's not true. I had mostly lived in the United States up until that point. And in this hyper fast paced, ego driven, identity driven, success driven, scary world that we live in, it's community was not it's not always easy to find, prioritizing that. And I loved that was prioritized in that home. I have since then continually found myself in Christian communities that were radically welcoming. I lived in France for a while, more recently, and I participated in a church there that I think about all the time because it's just so human. They do church in a shared church space, like it's not just theirs, and everybody cleans it together and like does the chores and the fellowship, and everybody just keeps showing up. And it's so love forward. It's not about production value. It's not about so much that I think a lot of faith communities can get caught up in and feel like they have to get caught up in order to get new members. But I was so struck, and this community had services in French and in Arabic. It was primarily English speaking, but people were from all over the world, sort of moving through these transitory phases in this immigrant culture in the south of France. Well, I would call it the south of France. There's disagreement about that, but there was that. And then so many of my friends in Oxford, they welcomed me. There was this one home full of, like, it was an intentional Christian community, and I had a friend who lived there, and I went to dinner there once, and I had a great time. And I said to them after dinner, I was like, "Hey, can I just like show up for dinner?" And they were like, "Yes, please." So I just like I just kept showing up. And um yeah, and I know a couple who lives in London. I know a handful of families who live in London who are so radically welcoming to people coming through and just like let people stay. And oh, and landing here where I live now in North Carolina, I was put in touch with somebody who let me stay with them for as long as I needed while I got settled. I have been so provided for. Speaking of
Mm.
provision, in this sense, yeah.
Yeah, you used the phrase in our exchange before this. You felt that way of being weirdly provided for. What did you mean by that?
I mean, so speaking of coincidences, I was raised more or less atheist and was always atheist, and everything is obviously a coincidence. Like, period. Like there is no possibility that any other funny stuff is happening. And so, the language, weirdly funny stuff, like, because to me it just seems the whole idea that things might not be coincidences is totally bizarre. and and that was something that I intentionally opened myself to when I was first living in France. I spent a year like really deeply exploring faith and cultivating my personal capacities to be of faith. And one of the key things I did in that moment was realize that interpretation is a matter of choice. Somebody in the church that I was attending in France told the story. He was out walking in the woods as a kid or something and wrestling with the idea of God, and said out loud, I think, like, "God, if you're out there, give me a sign." And then a shooting star went through the sky, and he was like, "Ah, it's a coincidence." And I realized that whether or not I see things purely as coincidental is entirely up to me. And I will never see or experience the world as anything other than coincidental unless I choose to at least be open to it. So then I started like these two parallel tracks of interpretation. And I decided to really look at what might like look at the world as if it may not be coincidental, and maybe not everything is planned or determined. I don't know how I might be making sense of all of this in the long term. But I have opened myself to interpreting the world as less coincidental, and it's pretty wild, uh because things things happen in ways that I have a hard time now dismissing as pure coincidence. Just the timing of certain events that enabled me to walk certain paths, I think has been like the most weird thing to me. I Things coming through at the last minute that unlock something that end up being really great, or X, Y, and Z kind of things like that. And again, in moving to North Carolina professionally, insofar as I might be called to any particular modes of being, and that's really helped me like learn to relax. I think myself as an atheist, and a lot of people I know in my life who are non-believers, I always felt like I had to try really hard to control outcomes because I was the only one who could. But now that I think that God might be doing stuff somehow, it's really helped me lean into trust. And so they're kind of playing
Mm.
off each other. The more I trust, the less things seem coincidental. The less coincidental things are, the more capable I am of trust. So, um, yeah, but it feels very weird in a great way.
This is wonderful. Thank you for being so honest about your journey and not like I don't want to put labels on you. I don't want to like assume your story. I don't know much about it other than your willingness to say, "Hey, I was raised up in this atheist household and had this thought process, and then now I'm a looking at myself and saying I'm open to the fact that maybe everything's not a coincidence and moving towards like what moved you from an atheist to this believing agnostic or whatever you want to however you want to describe your belief on God now. Like what made that shift? Was it the community? You mentioned some beautiful radical hospitality. Just walk us through that because I think this is so inspiring for me to hear how if I can just live a life of radical hospitality that might help others see God and not me. So like I'm being inspired by your stories. That's why I want to ask and not to put you on the spot, but just to share as much as or as little as you want to.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's so many moving parts, and a lot of them are philosophical and metaphysical. I think at the bottom, like I've always been deeply hungry for God. I think some data out there does suggest, and it's limited, but people raised atheist convert away from it at quite high rates compared even to say agnosticism, because I mean, at least for me personally, like there was a real emptiness to it. And that's not saying that atheism is always necessarily empty. And well, I think it might be, but I'm not going to say that that's the case for everybody. It was for me. And so, I have always been longing for God, but I needed to do a lot of philosophical work to deconstruct our culture and how I'd grown up and our norms, all that kind of stuff, and become more philosophically, metaphysically open to the idea of a great beyond. And I really love some of the ideas that I've come up with, um, or encountered, not that I've devised them myself. Um, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. But you are correct that something that has been so powerful me has been witnessing the transformative power of faith for people. There were wonderful people of all different religious and believing identifications, but I have met people who consider Jesus Christ their savior, who just blow my mind with the way that they walk through space, and is the Holy Spirit in their heart sort of thrumming on their skin. But it's been that example has been so powerful to me, because I believe so much in like living a beautiful life, and I want to. And a part of me sees that and it says, how do I become that? And my favorite philosopher, William James, he makes the excellent point, and I agree that like faith is deeply empowering. It is healing and it is empowering, and I think those things go together. And also, yes, my friends and the communities that I've been a part of were so important to me because they welcomed me, and I was just alongside them, and I witnessed and participated in their joy and their celebration, and loved it. And they held space for me. They weren't judgmental. I think that that's the only, being alongside is really the best that we can ever do with anybody. We're all in our own positions. We all come from our own backgrounds. And if we just walk alongside one another lovingly and contribute and like offer from our personal perspective, my friends who loved Jesus, they were like, you don't have to, but like, here's Matthew 20, 16, 20, 25, whatever, you don't have to, but I really like this passage. And I was like, oh yeah, me too, And so, yeah, whatever it is that you're doing, Justin, or whoever this is, maybe inspiring you to be more hospitable, absolutely, absolutely, that is so unlocking, I think.
Mm.
Mm.
One of the things that has stood out to me is I'm currently leading a men's group, and it's a Christian men's group through the C.L. Thomas Fellowship. And, we read a book a month. We have a scripture that we meditate on. We have like a challenge or a prayer request. And we recently had a story weekend retreat where we went to my family lodge in Virginia, and everyone shares their story. So they get about an hour. And then at the very end, I had kind of this throwaway comment that I thought was a throwaway comment, but it was one that landed at least with one of the guys who followed up with me afterwards. And after a long weekend and a good, deep, rich weekend, Sunday morning before we leave, I take the guys out to the tree stand, and we just reflect on the weekend. And I say, actually, my heart with this whole group is that I give you my best. So the best books, the best mentors, the best places like this right here, to me means a lot, and to my family. And so it was just one of those like unscripted moments that I think is it doesn't happen often enough in my life, quite honestly. But I feel like that
Mm.
was a little bit of a spirit nudge, a God nudge to just share my true heart that really landed, at least with one of the guys, in a very deep way. And so I hope that I can be that friend that you've experienced in different areas. I mean, geographic areas from the Northeast to the south of France, of just meeting people where they're at and loving them and giving them my best.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's all we can do. From what I can tell from my brief encounters with you, I think you're doing it. And something I think about a lot for me and in our world today, is John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Because
Oh, tell me about that. That is actually that was mentioned in the story weekend of a book that one of the guys really resonated with. So tell the listeners about this book and your key takeaway.
it's real funny because I was speed reading through the book. I was like, oh, I got to finish this. It's ironic. That's ironic. Um, but uh, it's deeply, it's very biblical. It's very rooted in scripture, and the basic argument is hurry is antagonistic to a loving life. It's not the life that Christ calls us into. Should Christ be the one calling us into whatever? But that's me. The author very much believes that. And a friend said to me when I was discussing this book with them, she said, anything that you hurry for is an idol because you're putting it before your presence in the world, and that's where God calls you to be. Very interesting. And the book talks about how there were there were a million healings and things that Jesus could have been running around doing, but Jesus did a lot of like hanging out, didn't like run to get there. He'll get there when he gets there. And I know personally that I get so caught up in my work and in needing to finish it and finishing my to-do list and X, Y, and Z things. Like it's selfish. I mention this because I encountered you in a co-working space kitchen where people are constantly walking through. And I like to sit there and work and focus on what I need to accomplish. And there are things that I need to accomplish, sure, like that's the nature of the world we live in. But the more stressed I am and the more hurried I am, the more impatient I am, and the less I see and honor and am present with the people I meet. And that's not loving. So I've kind of started this practice. I try when things are slowing me down, I say out loud, like, thank you. Whereas initially I used to be like, oh, no. I try to say out loud, like, thank you for the opportunity to live a more loving life, to remind me to slow down and be more patient, present, live a more loving life. And when I met you in that kitchen, I don't remember where I was on that spectrum, but I'm always aware of it. And I was aware of the fact that you had a group of people to get back to, but also were present with me in that moment of making that coffee. And then you were going to go be present with the people in that room. And I think we are more empowered to give our best selves, I think is what you said, when we slow down a little bit, when we let that be true. But that also means feeling safe, right? Because when we don't feel safe, then we kind of, then we can't share our best selves, and we don't live in a safe world. So there's all this kind of stuff to navigate. Anyway.
No, that's a great. Thank you for bringing that book up, because as I mentioned, one of the men in my men's group said this book has really meant a lot to me, and how your friend, I think, phrased it to you was, yeah, anything that makes us hurry could be an idol. That's a really good challenge of thinking about my day, my week, my month. When is the time that I feel my heart racing? When is the time that I'm being hurried and rushed? And does that associate with an idol? And I'm curious, in your world, when that pops up, does it tend to be work related or personal related? Anything you want to reflect on with that from a personal perspective?
Oh yeah, it's my work.
Hmm.
So I mean, we all seek safety in various ways. I personally seek safety through working. I know that. I like to produce content. And I'm self-employed, so I'm all hustle culture, like need to get this done. Um, and in fact, I emailed you and told you I was going to be late because I was not home and I was rushing to get something done. And then I had to rush to drive here and I was rushing and I was aware of the fact that I had done this to myself. I was kind of an accident. I worked for longer than I had intended, but I watch it happening. Yeah. And then I'm in a hurry. And it's so funny to me the way that I drive. The experience of driving is so different when I give myself like enough space to get somewhere on time and when I don't. Like it's wild, and how you feel like it matters. And I have neighbors, and it's so neighborly here where I live. And I think I try so hard. I think I'm not called in to produce a lot of content. I do think the content I produce helps people. Cool. But the life that I think that I'm called into is being present and loving. And for me, that means being neighborly. And when I'm in a hurry, I run out my front door, and my neighbor, she's on a rocker and she's with her little dog. And taking 7 minutes to go say hi, to have that moment of human connection, why not do that? What am I going to gain? Not even 7 minutes, 2 minutes. What am I going to gain by taking those 2 minutes for my work? Because 2 minutes with that neighbor it's going to feed both of us, because that's fellowship, that's love, Jesus or whomever, whatever's calling us into that, like that's it.
Hmm.
And in all my incertitude about what might be metaphysically happening in all of this, like I'm quite sure, these are hills that I can die on. Like I'm quite sure that that kind of present life, the loving life, is what we're called into. Um, so yeah, that's an area of growth for me right now. Slowing down. Somebody the other day, Somebody the other day said to me, they're like, you really give me the impression of somebody who has like space in their life to just kind of be slow and not do that much and hang out with your neighbors. And I was like, whoa, you are the first person in my life to ever say that to me. But I've been intentionally cultivating that and prioritizing that because I think that's what we're called to do.
That's great. And a great challenge for us all. And to be neighborly, you mentioned how you don't see, when reading scripture, Jesus hurrying anywhere. And that is a really good point. I haven't thought about that. And I'll have to check out the book that you mentioned. I'm sure they bring that up.
It's not my point, it's Cromer's point. He makes it at length throughout the book. You will find abundant references to scripture in support of that point.
Well, thank you. That's great. That's why I love doing these podcasts, to learn from other people and what has been their best, like recent or in their lifetime with it. Um, it may make sense to do a little bit of a pivot here. And one of the things I wanted to ask
Mhm.
you about as well is, um, how do you make ideas sing? We just talked about a book, and how they make that idea sing of Jesus is never in a hurry, and that's really landed well with you and me during this. But in your work now, and maybe take this as an opportunity to share what you do now, how do you make ideas sing?
I love how you phrased all of that, an opportunity to discuss what I do now. So, since sort of taking my foot off the gas on promoting my own ideas, I sort of started waking up to, and this was all happening while I was stepping into faith and thinking about calling and always thinking that I needed to be like public and identity forward. And all along, I had been cultivating these skills of making ideas sing. And I realized that instead of just putting forward my own ideas, I could help elevate a plurality of voices. And so now I'm still working on my own books about my journey and concepts that I've explored, some things I might offer to people for spiritual peace in an uncertain world. Uh, I I want to I use my skills to partner with others to help them share their ideas. I love that. It's so fun for me. I'm an introvert. I don't know what I was thinking. Like going on people's podcasts is fine. I used to host. I host a podcast, but I'm a co-host and she's the main host. But like all the extroverted stuff, it's anyway. So this is one of those things that I sort of fell into. All the doors kept opening in weirdly serendipitous timing. Everything just seems to keep happening for me working as you could call it as a ghostwriter. I prefer writing partner, but uh, I feel like I have been quite led into this because I would not, never in a million years did I think I would, do it. And then as I started doing it, all the doors just kept, and I'm like, okay. And I really enjoy the work. And so what I do, and I love, you said make ideas sing. You must have read my website because that's a phrase that I use on my website. Let's make your ideas sing. Um, all along I was doing this exploration of spirit and theology and wanting to make sense of the world for myself. But I knew that that was quite quite selfish, and I wanted, the reason I was trying to share my philosophical ideas was because I wanted to use my explorations. I wanted to connect and help people if I could, Um, and academia is so unfortunately structured that it's I mean, it's often called an ivory tower, like for a reason. Like it's so walled off and can be so insular. And there's this there's this impression, that formulating things with really complex language is like the epitome of intellectual discourse. But I actually think a step beyond that, that's more difficult and that we are called into, is framing it in ways that are like accessible and engaging to a wide variety of audiences. And of course, like every target audience has a different set of concepts and words that they use to think through different ideas. But as humans, when we converse with one another, like I really believe in thinking about the ways that ideas like land with other people. I always see it as some kind of like a bridge, you're over there, I'm over here. How do we walk that bridge? How do I really share with you like the honest nature of what I'm experiencing that resonates with the honest nature of your experience. And so making ideas sing is really an exercise in getting to know who you're singing to, and hitting that pitch.
Hmm.
And that's part of why I love the work of ghostwriting so much, is it's really like, it's all about empathy. It's about understanding the author whose work I'm trying to help elevate, and the audience, and what are the words that make this idea come alive for people, and how do you make it land? There's so much rich potential out there in the world for conversation across these divides that seem so impassable to us. But if you locate shared values, if you locate, like, everybody loves truth, let's start there. Everybody loves beauty, everybody loves goodness, let's start there. And you can really, really, like, I just, in my work and being in all these different communities, atheist communities, evangelical communities, academic communities, I've been in a lot of them, and there are ways to talk across these divides. And so for me, yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I am learning something about myself and my work right now, because making ideas sing is really, it's about empathy.